Well, good evening, Forrest Mill. Glad you could join us tonight. Hope that you're having a blessed week. I'm certainly looking forward to our time together. I've been really enjoying our time together on Sunday mornings, and I think that's been a blessing to all, whether they were able to be there in person or watching online virtually. We're thankful for your presence and your participation in the body here at Forrest Mill. I want to deal tonight with a psalm that I really wanted to. The more I got into it, the more valuable I found it. And so we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. We're going to break up a psalm into two parts. And this week we'll deal with part one, and next week we'll try to deal with part two. I want to start with a quote, probably one you've heard before, even if you didn't know the source or the reasoning behind it. But it comes from Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto. And his quote in this particular regard is that religion is the opiate of the masses. Now, Christianity and religion in general has long had its critics, and they have charged, like Marx, that religion is an invention designed for people who are incapable of coping with life's pressures. That somehow people who are religious are deficient in some way. Some critics respond that they don't need this kind of emotional comfort, as though, just because they don't need it, that must mean Christianity is false. These individuals might claim that they're stronger or that they're brave enough to face life without this sort of crutch. But to imply that people who aren't religious don't need a crutch is a little misleading, because most of the world has some sort of crutch. Some crutches are obvious, dependence on drugs or alcohol or sex or money or power or other people or material possessions. Those are obvious, but really all of us need something. Everyone needs something. Even atheism itself can become a crutch for its adherents, because it helps you justify why you're living the way you are, right? So rather than being weak, what I would propose is that Christians are strong, not because we have this innate power of life or of character, strength of character, but we're strong because we're dependent on God. Everyone needs assistance. The question is, what will we lean on? What will we choose to place our dependence on? And I believe that Christianity provides what atheism or even other religions cannot provide. And that is the spiritual peace and fulfillment and forgiveness that comes through a relationship in Jesus Christ. We all have a need for something to help us through life. If you listen to our prayers, we ask God for assistance on virtually everything. We ask for healing, for help, for comfort, for strength, forgiveness, for mercy, any number of things, for guidance. Some of our questions that we pose God may go unanswered for a time. Some are not answerable to our satisfaction. But some just we can't seem to get the answers to, but we ask nonetheless. The Boston Globe a few years ago had this daily column that was designed to answer readers' questions, and they came up with a top 10 list of unanswerable questions. One of my favorites was from a little boy. It says, "I'm 9 years of age and I have a cat that eats regularly and needs to go on a diet. He also eats mice when he is out. How many calories in a mouse?" Well, some questions can't be answered right now. But fortunately for us, God does answer our requests for help. It may not be answered fully. It may not be answered yes in the affirmative. It may not even be answered to our satisfaction in this lifetime. But we know that our requests and petitions are being heard and are answered and will be answered. The psalm that we're going to be looking at tonight asks some things of God that I think we all can use. And my prayer is that we'll get to glean something from this scripture that will help us when we make requests of God. So if you have your Bibles and you want to read along, tonight we're looking at Psalm 69. Now this particular psalm, you may be surprised to know, it's frequently quoted in the New Testament. In fact, it is the third most quoted psalm in the New Testament. A little trivia for you there. It is attributed to David most of the time. It has a lot in common with Psalm 35, with Psalm 40, with Psalm 109 that we believe are all attributed to David. But in this particular psalm, Psalm 69, there's a portion of it, verses 30 through 36, that we'll get to next week, that they don't seem to fit with anything we know that occurred during the life of David. Now, granted, we don't know everything that happened in David's life, but this particular set of verses, you would think we might have heard something about that. So some people believe this psalm fits with events that occurred during the life of Jeremiah and Hezekiah. But it's difficult to fit it all into the life of David. It's possible, as some believe, that David wrote this psalm, and that original psalm ended at verse 29, and that Jeremiah was led by the Spirit to add some more verses later, which would have been completely not only permissible but encouraged in their culture. So maybe David wrote verses 1 through 29, and Jeremiah later wrote verses 30 through 36 after the fall of Judah and Jerusalem to the Babylonians. Which, because the Psalms we're reading tonight were known, what's known as a living heritage. In other words, some of the Psalms were adapted for new occasions. They were changed, and maybe the events were updated, but they were believed to be a part of this living heritage of praise and worship and conversation with God. So whatever the answer is, I don't know for sure, but we'll see as we read this psalm that the author confronts the Lord with three really important questions. So let's start by reading verses 1 through 4. Save me, O God, from the water, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the miry depths where there is no foothold. I have come into the deep waters. The flood engulfs me. I am worn out calling for help. My throat is parched. My eyes fail, looking for my God. Those who hate me without reason outnumber the hairs of my head. Many are my enemies without cause, those who seek to destroy me. I am forced to restore what I did not steal. So the author begins by asking for his own deliverance, for his own sake. And he describes this dangerous situation that's like a man drowning, and he's sinking and can't seem to stay afloat. Now listen to how desperate his cries are in this situation. He says, save me, right, in verse 1. Later on, he'll say, deliver me. And verses 16 and 17, he says, hear me or answer me. And in verse 18, later he'll say, redeem me, rescue me. There's all this language of pleading for help. He had been praying to the Lord, but God had not answered him, at least not yet. And he, like us, wants an answer right now. In fact, in verse 17, he says, answer me now, right? He is looking for immediate answers. In verse 5, he confesses that he's not sinless, but that he's innocent of the charges his enemies were making against him. I may not be perfect at it, but I haven't done what they're saying I did. And yet they still are treating me as if I'm guilty. It reminds me some of the stories that have been emerging from our own justice system, where we have women and men, particularly men, imprisoned who confessed that they had not lived a perfect life and they had made mistakes, but they hadn't done what they were sitting in prison for. And what a difficult situation to try to prove you didn't do something you were accused of. In fact, it's a situation that Jesus can identify with. You may recognize verse 4 from the New Testament, where Jesus was talking to his disciples in the upper room, and he's talking about it in reference to myself. Like all these people, he essentially says, all these people are accusing me of something I haven't done. So just like us, this author begins by asking for help, just because he wants out of trouble, right? For his own sake. And it's not a selfish ask, though it may sound like it, but to get out of trouble that's not of your own making, that's nothing wrong with that. But this author doesn't stop there. He also asks for help, not only for his own sake, but for the Lord's sake. Look down at verses 6 through 12. Lord, the Lord Almighty, may those who hope in you not be disgraced because of me. God of Israel, may those who seek you not be put to shame because of me. For I endure scorn for your sake, and shame covers my face. I am a foreigner to my own family, a stranger to my own mother's children. For zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me. When I weep and fast, I must endure scorn. When I put on sackcloth, people make sport of me. Those who sit at the gate mock me, and I am the song of the drunkards. So here we learn a little bit more about his situation, because those who were accusing him and lying about him, essentially, were also blaspheming the name of the Lord. And the author doesn't want God's people to suffer because of him. In other words, he sees how his situation is impacting God's people around him. There's a word, reproach or scorn or insults, that is used like 6 times throughout this psalm. He says he was scorned because he stood up for the Lord there in verse 7, because he was zealous for God's house, verse 9. He talks about how he was alienated from his own family, how the insults that people threw at the Lord also fell on him, which is really interesting, because he's saying when they were blaspheming God, they were also blaspheming him. That their attacks against him were also attacks against God. So my question is, are we so close to God? Are you so close to God that when people attack either you or God, that they attack the other? Are you so close to God that when people attack God, they're also attacking you? Or when people attack you, they're also attacking God? I think about some of the situations in recent warfare where the combatants hide among women and children and civilization, and seeking to fight these combatants. Sometimes we were dropping bombs and killing innocent people, not because the women and the children had done anything wrong, but because they had been brought into harm's way by these enemy combatants, right? We may try not to take out, or not to have civilian casualties, but they're so close, so intertwined that our military seemed unable to deal with that, to separate that out. And in this particular situation, the psalmist, probably David here, calls for God to help him in full faith that some way, somehow, God would deliver him. How could he know that? How could he know God was going to deliver him? That's a good question. I think for the psalmist part, that's because he is so certain that he's on the side of the Lord. The soldier's first article of faith is summed up nowhere more eloquently then in a letter from 1865, and General William Tecumseh Sherman was writing to Ulysses S. Grant. And he said this, he said, "I knew wherever I was that if you thought of me, and if I got in a tight place, you would come if alive." Brethren, what a faith. We should be so confident. We should be so solidly aligned with God that there is no doubt when we ask for God for his divine assistance that we'll receive it. Just knowing that wherever we are, whatever spot we're in, that God will come to our aid if alive. And we believe without a shadow of a doubt that our God is alive. We may not always have our prayers answered immediately or positively, but we can know that God is on our side and that God desires the very best for us, so that if we're in a difficult situation, we're not there alone. So that's my word of encouragement for you tonight. Next week we'll pick up with verse 19 and go through the rest of the psalm. Really powerful words of encouragement to remind us that no matter our situation, God is ready and listening and willing and capable. That he has a history of helping his people because that's his character. And that we can know whatever our situation might be, that God will do that for us as well. May God bless you tonight and the study of his word. We'll see you again next week at the same time as we'll continue studying Psalm 69. God bless.